Hello, and welcome to our panel discussion today with the Taiwan Film Festival Edinburgh in collaboration with Cinetopia. I'm Amanda. I run Cinetopia, which is an organization that aims to foster discussion around film and filmmaking. I'm thrilled to be working with the Taiwan Film Festival Edinburgh on this discussion event and hosting this conversation that certainly should be quite an engaging one on curating Taiwanese film for European audiences.
In Taiwan, there are two different languages, at least. There are a number of different languages, but two dominant languages, if you like. And one is the language that is part of the Minnanhua group and is spoken by most of the islanders and has been spoken by most of them for many generations. And the other dominant language is Mandarin, which the KMT government brought over and imposed as the national language after the end of Japanese colonialism and after they were defeated by the communists. And so you had a situation by the 1960s where you had a kind of official cinema sponsored by the government in Mandarin, but the bulk of the audience didn't really speak Mandarin, and they wanted to see films in their own language. But those films, as Wafa was just suggesting, were mostly much lower budget. They were not made with government support. They were made by small companies, many of which went bankrupt. And there were over 1,000 made before television basically eclipsed that cinema in the early 1970s. There was no film archive in Taiwan in the early 1970s. And out of 1,000 plus films that were made in this period, which was really the first regular feature filmmaking industry in Taiwan, out of 1,000 plus films, only a couple of hundred have survived. And they, because of the kind of stigma, if you like, of them not being in Mandarin, the government in the 70s and 80s neglected them, and the cinephile culture also was wanting art films. You know, it was moving in the Ho Xiaoxian direction, which is the opposite of low budget genre cinema. And so they also tended to neglect these films. And it's only recently that they've been rediscovered. Hence the title of, the series that we've been doing, Taiwan's Lost Commercial Cinema. It is this lost commercial cinema that has been somewhat recovered.
Taiwan New Cinema did just not appear from anywhere, and it has some maybe secret paths and a kind of a secret link between Taiwan film history in the past and the Taiwan New Cinema. So that's why the program I did was a kind of a mix of some Mandarin films, but not so official, like to see how some directors really try to play with the censorship and to offer their own vision, such as Panlay's film Typhoon, which is really one of the most beautiful films of the 60s, which is quite unknown, which is really a shame. And also some Taiyupian, and I think the comedies, the Taiyu social comedies of the 60s are really, really funny and somehow sometimes maybe easier to watch. And they make you understand a lot about the situation of Taiwan in the 60s and the different influence of American comedies, Italian comedies, because you have, yes, Italian music, you have everything in that. It's a kind of a big mix of a lot of different European, Japanese, and Taiwanese genre all mixed together, traditional opera and with very strong female characters, which is also very important because it's something you will find in Taiwan Black cinema and also in New Cinema. You have all this link with very strong heroines. And to finish this program, I finished with the very beginning of the 80s with what was called the Taiwan Black cinema. So this very, what they call social realism, which was not really the case. But because these films, the Taiwan Black cinema is really the last expression of the Taiyupian, even if it's in Mandarin and not in Taiwanese. most of the directors were coming from the Taiwanese language film era. Like some actors had become directors, and you can see the vision of the society, which is very black, the fact that they had no money, so they will shoot in the streets, and so there were so many links between the film of the 60s and the film of the beginning of the 80s. And it was, I think, a kind of interesting transition. Taiwan had this possibility of a very more artistic cinema in the 60s and 70s, but these attempts were crushed by censorship and the situation at the time. So yeah, it was a way of a kind of a different Taiwan film history somehow.
I think there are a lot of reasons for other Asian countries, like in China, they have this censorship, and the queer cinema making has to go underground. And in Hong Kong, probably it's because the commercial funding reasons, they kind of like there was a gap of queer cinema making in Hong Kong. But in Taiwan, the difference here is like, even though it still like went down, went up, but every year you will see people making queer films, and it's actually back from 80s. Even during that time, it was still under martial laws. A lot of queer cinemas back made in 90s, but you can see during that time the topic will still be focused on this group of people. They got lost, they got abandoned by their family. They have to be in this like very famous Taipei New Park, and then they kind of like gathering together and then living their own life. But you can always feel like it's still like a social. I mean, you can still sense the social oppression there, and then you can see their struggles, their sufferings. And then when step into early 2000s, there's a new genre appeared, like Blue Gay Crossing. So this kind of like coming of age, campus, high school based, very youthful cinema start get into the public side. And I think this is actually a very interesting genre compared to not like Western society, because I mean, this kind of collective living style in the campus, and then you have to wear uniform, you have the same haircut, and you have like a military in your school to tell you can't have relationship with other men, and you can't have relationship with other boys, other girls, and then you just feel like these characters, they are actually living in a bubble. So in this bubble, like there's no society. There's just they're just between them, like this young girl. They probably these kind of films, they always focus on this self-discovery, their kind of like their question about their identity, and so it's like very pure kind of films in early 2000s, and then till now, I think the topic is got a very widespread. So like when we talk about queer cinema now, it's actually not just about gay, lesbians. It's actually people start to discover different topics, and a lot of topics are actually very social issue oriented. So we have films start talking about AIDS and HIV, and we have films, a very latest film called Dear Tenant, 亲爱的房客. It's actually talking about the same-sex marriage couple and the child adoption. So this kind of like new, very political oriented, social oriented films is kind of like the new cinemas in recent Taiwan. And I feel this is actually very exciting because they are showing different perspectives and different orientations of what queer cinema means to Taiwanese people and means to Asians.
I sort of was reminded again of something that I really learned a long time ago and forgot, which is the importance of the university as a site for screenings. You know, you've got these lecture theaters, you can usually access them often for free or for a relatively small amount of money. and you can do screenings and other events. You can do all these things on the university at relatively low cost. And you can then start to establish a bit more of a buzz. And one of the things I have to notice is that, the first time we did it, 2017 and 18, we were only working with universities. But once we came to do it again the next time, obviously people had heard about it. And so suddenly some of these more general public-facing events, like Five Flavors or the Asian cinema festival in Prague, which they were more open to saying, okay, let's screen some of these. So it's about stepping stones, I think.
I think it's really interesting what you say, because I think in France it might be the opposite. That because we did it at Cinémathèque, then it became interesting for other places, like other cinémathèques or other festivals. And I think to reach a broader audience, you have to be careful of your narratives. So French people love, being told that we are a free country, that people are fighting for freedom. And so if you can put this program and say, okay, this film, we're trying in their limits to go against the dictatorship of the time or the very conservative government, and it was somehow a preview or the first steps to the new cinema. So you speak to the cinephiles and you speak to the French people who think they are ahead of all the freedom fights. I think it's how it works to try to go to a broader audience, like to find some topics that ring a bell for them, I think.
We actually work with a lot with independent cinemas and local cinemas. But of course, we got very lucky. We had a chance to work with leading institutions like Barbican, like Manchester's Home. So it's kind of like a mixture. But I feel we did do quite an extensive research of which cinema should work. Because queer cinema is actually not a new topic for audience in the UK. Like people love see queer cinema. There are tons of different LGBTQ plus film festivals happen every month here. And then, so we try to find those cinemas who tend to be more into indie international films, queer films. So we work with Genesis, Rio. They are based in East London, and then they had audience there. And my original idea is we are screening good films, interesting films. So it's just you should screen normal films, and it's like a normal festival. So we go with normal price. We don't do a lot of film festival will do £5 discounted price or something, or screening free. I mean, that's also a good thing, but we kind of trying to do a different tryout. So we try to say this as normal. It's good content, and you pay and you see a film. So that's kind of our approach. And then I'm quite happy, cinemas here, they are quite supportive. So that's our first year, and we already got in partnership with around 10 cinemas in London and also outside of London.
I think it's definitely true that with each place, you have a different reaction, a different response. And some audiences find it easier to get the films and some of them just don't. It's not always a matter of, one country or another. Sometimes it's just a question of what the audience is.
I think Q&As and also introductions, because these films, some of them are really hard to get if you just see them like that. You say, why have you chosen this film? It's not well shot, it's not so great, and you have to explain why.
I think the other thing is, of course, you do get the audience, you do get the other audience, which is the audience that is already interested in Taiwan. And so, for example, screening it in ZOAS, School of Oriental and African Studies here in London, it has a huge Taiwan Studies Center. And so the primary audience are people who are already interested in Taiwan. But these films, they come from the era of martial law, when the government had very strong control over the media and over cinema. So we're used to only seeing these god-awful healthy realist films, so-called sort of government propaganda films that, presented this very sort of, optimistic image of Taiwanese development. People spend their lives among thousands of ducklings in the mud and come home and they're spotlessly clean, They're sort of and speak pure Mandarin, which nobody in the countryside in Taiwan does. But nonetheless, these were the films we were seeing. So these other films, although they also had to go through censorship, as Wafa mentioned, many of them were shot on location just because they didn't have the budget to do it in studios. So suddenly you are actually seeing what the streets looked like in Taiwan in the 60s, the real streets, not these sort of, optimistically pictured streets from the Mandarin cinema. So for that audience that's interested in Taiwan, there's something rather different that's appealing about them. So it's absolutely true. You have to think a little bit about each audience, position the films, introduce them, be there to try and do some Q&A. And the Q&A, hopefully, if it goes well, and I think it did in most cases, you see some of the people come back again, bring some friends with them, and so on. So it's all about audience development in a way. And through that also, I think, developing more knowledge about Taiwan, but also about Taiwan cinema. I think more and more screening events, festivals will be hybrid. They will do screenings in the movie theater, but they will also have events online. And exactly what the balance will be, I don't know.
I think these online streaming platforms is booming. Of course, we can see, especially from now, and this actually linked to the other question about post-COVID festivals, because I do see more and more festivals start to working with online streaming platform, no matter like Mubi or like Filmdu, and then I think in a way it's actually not bad from audience perspective, because you don't need to be present in a specific time on a specific day. Like you can watch the films from any time you want. We are actually very open for this kind of like hybrid format, and then working with streaming platforms. And for myself, I personally think this online Q&A will be a great solution for us, like for people like us doing international film festival, because traveling a guest from Asia is just the money is crazy itself, and also the time consuming, and also it's actually it's a very tiring job for guests as well.
Yeah. In terms of watching film, it could be good, but festival is not only watching film. I think there is all this atmosphere of festival or something that happens, like the alchemy, like some. I think festival is well, you all know that we are all working in festival and things like that, but there is something about the atmosphere and the way you meet people live during a festival. I think that's something that the online screening won't achieve.
I don't think I will accept the online festival concepts.
Okay.
Like it will be online streaming, but festivals still need to in a physical form.
I think in this situation, this context of COVID and everything else, people are discovering a way to make, what's missing potentially from just streaming a film online is the sense of an event. If you can just watch it anytime, pay your however many pounds and stream, you lose that sense of event. Creating events like this, where people come together to talk and to answer some questions and, all the rest of that does create a sense of an event.